Hi and welcome to my presentation for EDU 60017. This presentation is going to discuss the theory of behaviourism. It will look at the history, the main features and how it will look within a classroom, and then how I think it will fit with my way of teaching. So personally I believe that all children learn and progress in different ways and at different times. What works for one child may not work for the next. Being a teacher, I feel that we have a great responsibility to find out what works best for each child and try to accommodate that as best as possible. As a mum of 4 boys, I know a lot. I know that managing behaviour can be a difficult task. Like mentioned before, children learn different to one another. I actually have twins, and even though they are best of friends, extremely close, and in a lot of ways very similar, they're completely different behaviours and personalities. Reinforcing good behaviour is how I was brought up and how I went through school in the 80s and the 90s. Rewards are a great motivator. However, as a teacher and as a parent, this needs to be monitored, as from experience I know that rewards can become boring quickly. I feel that change and reward is one way to keep children focused on the goal. Behaviourism is primarily concerned with observable behaviour as opposed to internal events like thinking and emotion. It looks at the external events such as reward or punishment on behaviour. Behaviourism looks at 2 types of conditioning, classic conditioning and operant conditioning, and this will be discussed shortly. First, I'd just like to have a look at the history of behaviourism and where it's at today. So the history of behaviourism dates back to the early 20th century. While Watson is known as the father of behaviourism psychology, Ian Pavlov, a Nobel Prize winner, identified classical conditioning with his experiments with dogs. Pavlov could train dogs to respond to a certain way to different stimuli, with his 3 main points being conditioned stimulus, conditioned response, and discrimination, which we'll have a look further in another few slides. We'll have a look at that. Following on from Pavlov, John Watson looked at the nature versus nurture argument, and that behaviour is made and not something we are born with. He famously stated, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well formed in my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to make one at random and train him to become a type of specialist. I might select a doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even beggar man and thief, regardless of his talents, purchase, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors." Whilst clearly not an ethical thing to do, it is this statement and Watson's research that brought behaviourism to the forefront of psychology. B.F. Skinner then later looked at Pavlov and Watson's ideas and revised them into what he called operant conditioning. He looked closely at reinforcement in both positive and a negative way. So we'll look at the first one, classical conditioning of Pavlov's idea. If a stimulus that results in an emotional response is repeated alongside another stimulus which does not cause an emotional response, eventually the second stimulus will result in the same emotional response. Classic conditioning is learning by association, as you can see an example in the slide with Pavlov's dog conditioning. Operant conditioning, a behaviour will increase if it's followed by reinforcement. It will decrease if it's followed by punishment. Operant conditioning is learning by consequences. For example, going to a restaurant for dinner would be the behaviour, reward with good food would be the consequence, and then you would return to the restaurant again. That would be your effect of your behaviour. Obviously, if the food was bad, you more likely wouldn't return, and that's the basic of operant conditioning. Now, the strengths, one of the major strengths associated with behaviourism is it's based on observable behaviours, which makes it easier to collect data. Behaviour that can be seen by onlookers, such as a teacher, can often be corrected following the idea of conditioning. However, it's argued that the main limitation of behaviourism is that it's a one-dimensional approach to understanding human behaviour, and that behavioural theories do not account for free will and internal influence such as mood, thoughts and feelings. Now, behaviourism within a classroom, so I've worked within a classroom with students from anywhere from reception to year 7 and seen how the behaviour can affect both the student, the class and the teacher. I feel that the use of this theory in a classroom works well. A behavioural approach to classroom management focuses on establishing clear expectations for appropriate behaviour, monitoring behaviour, and then reinforcing appropriate behaviour and redirecting inappropriate behaviour. So, to finish off, behaviourism is a theory that has been used for a long time within schools and has produced some great outcomes. As mentioned, there are limitations that we must be aware of when practicing this theory in the classroom. However, the fact that it stood the test of the time and it's still in use today, it can only be a positive when looking at behaviourism in our classrooms. So just thank you for your time and listening to my presentation. Bye.